Okay, so yesterday we finished off by saying that if someone agrees to sell something on concession, then during the time that he's holding on to it, he has the din of a shomer sachar, and because he's getting in some way some kind of compensation for his guardianship, for his bailment, and therefore if there would be theft or loss, he would be liable. Okay, now. Next shayla. Shomer sachar sheshomer kiroi v'niachas haksafim tachas hakarka ba'omek harbe. Okay, now the Gemara makes a statement. The Gemara says that the only way to properly guard money is by sticking it in the ground. So it's important to know why the Gemara says that. The Gemara was written at a time when we didn't have safe technology, the technology of safes. Okay, so the Gemara therefore said, well, how do you protect someone else's property? Dig a hole, stick it in the ground, bury it. That's really the only way to ensure that a person's property is going to remain safe from theft and loss. Okay, so let's say a person does that. He digs a hole, sticks the cash in a big bag, drops it into the ground. So if the item gets stolen, will a shomer sachar be potter in that case? So he's done everything he's supposed to do. So in that case, if the item gets discovered, can he claim onus? Because there was absolutely nothing that I could have done to prevent it. So the answer is shomer sachar sheshomer kiroi v'niachas haksofim tachas hakarka afilu ba'omek mea ama v'nignavu yesh omrim shechayev. Doesn't matter how deep he buried them. There is an opinion that says that he's still going to be chayev. V'hatam mipnei shekol gineva krovim la'ones hi v'chiyav aleha Torah. Because any theft is considered to be completely by accident, usually. In other words, most cases of theft is not where the guy left the front door wide open and put up a sign saying, robbers, please come in, right? It's usually where a person closed the door. Usually he even locks the door. And Ganovim are still able to break in. And yet the Torah still finds a Shomer Sachar liable for Geneva. V'lachein, and therefore, even though he's done everything he's supposed to do, in chiluk bein oines katan la'ones gadol, sha'klal hu sha'shomer tzarich shiyu einav pekuchos al hadavar ha'shomer biyado tamid. Because the bailer, the shomer is the bailer, right? The shomer has an obligation to watch over the item that is being watched by him, but is being guarded by him at all times.
The owner's the bailor.
The owner is the bailor, the shomer is the bailee. Okay, the imnenas miyado rak az patra oso haTorah. And it's only when he's literally holding it in his hands, and it gets physically snatched away from him, that the Torah says that he's patur, because that's the only onus that the Torah recognizes, that you did everything you could have done, and still got taken from you. The yesh omrim the geneva ba'onis gomer patur shomer sachar. Others disagree, and others say that the shomer is going to be patur in that case, because he did bury it in the ground. So let's see, what footnote is he referencing here? Shin Lamed Hey. It's all the way down.
Onus is like so crazy act of God to prevent, where man is not even involved. Is that wrong? Honestly, so if tsunami came in and lift up the ground.
Yeah.
That would be like an onion.
But the Gemara also says that listim mizuyan, that an armed robber is also considered to be a case of onus. The Gemara does distinguish between armed robbery versus theft. So if a cat burglar comes into my house in the middle of the night and steals my items, that's called geneva, and it's not an onus. But if people come with shotguns and demand the item that I'm actually holding and guarding very, very capably, that's called onus. So yes, it's an act of God. It can also be an act of man.
Mhm.
Okay. So apparently, this is a machlokas that's brought down by the Shulchan Aruch itself. He says, and he says, when a person is sleeping, everyone has to sleep. If they break it and they steal it, that's also, you could argue that's onus, but for that the Torah holds you liable. And even if a person surrounded the object with an iron wall, you know, and even if he had been there, he would not have been able to prevent them from stealing it. Nonetheless, he's chayev. Okay. So that's the position of the Shulchan Aruch. However, the Shach says that we really paskin like those who say that if it was a total onus, that he's potter. So based on this, there will be court cases where the defendant who lost the item could claim it was an onus gomer. The plaintiff will say, the bailor, the owner of the item will say, yeah, but wait a minute, you know, you were sleeping when they stole it. And he can say, yeah, but I put it, 10 feet deep into the ground. I did everything that I was supposed to do. I fortified it like, Fort Knox. So the Beis Din will have to heed the defense of the shomer, because he could claim that I paskin like the shach. Okay. Next. Next shaila. Misha mekabel schar al shmiras chayfetz omos kagon shenosin lo schar al kol yom v'yom. V'lo schar al shmiras hachayfetz o hamos b'shabbosos. Let's say a person is getting compensated for watching an item, but he's getting a daily wage. So he says, but you're not supposed to get paid for the stuff that you do on Shabbos, so I'm not going to get paid on Shabbos. Ha'im ba'osam hayamim sheinu mekabel avurim schar dino kishomer chinam, o afdin shomer chinam ein alav. So what is his halachic status on Shabbos? Do you argue that he's now a shomer chinam? Or perhaps he doesn't even have the status of a shomer chinam as far as liability, because he's basically recusing himself. He's basically withdrawing himself from shmira if he refuses to get paid. So what is a guy's status if he says, you know what, on Shabbos, it's my day of rest, I don't want to get paid. So the tshuva is Misha makabel schar al shmira, so benosin lo schar al kol yom v'yom. Kaven she'inosin lo schar Shabbos. If a person is not getting paid for the fact that it's in his possession on Shabbos, lachenim avdu o nignevu hamos, if the items get stolen, b'Shabbos einu chay b'achrayuso, he can claim that I was a shomer chinam. V'chein shomer sachar la'achar hazman shekavu b'neihem dino kishomer chinam. Or let's say a person watches an item and says, I'm going to watch it for, I'm going to help, I'm going to store this item in my garage for you until you get back from Florida on, Purim, on Purim. Okay, says he's coming back on Purim. So the guy sends him an email and tells him, I've decided to delay my trip. So, and I'm not coming back until after Pesach. Well, if the guy still stores it in his garage, he's no longer a Shomer Sacher. He's been demoted to a Shomer Chinam because the guy hasn't offered to pay him more. V'im HaShomer who's Schir Shabbos, Schir Chodesh, Schir Shana, Schir Shavua, Dino b'Shabbos k'Shomer Sacher, u'v'havla amuter litol Schar Shabbos, v'lochein achrayas HaShabbos alo v'chol shenevdu chayav. So how do you get around this? So first of all, in the case where a guy extends the guardianship because the bailment, because the guy just didn't show up on time, so then he could truly claim, listen, I agreed to watch this for you for 3 months. You decided to extend your trip by a month and you didn't offer to pay me more. So I'm not taking responsibility as a Shomer Sacher anymore. That's perfectly within his rights. But what can a person do to protect himself from having the guy make that claim that I was a Shomer Chinam and not a Shomer Sacher? Well, let's go back to the case where a guy says, I'm going to pay you $10 a day for watching my stuff. Okay. But I don't take schiras on Shabbos. So pay me for every week, you'll pay me $60. And the seventh day, you're not going to pay me because it's Schar Shabbos. So in that case, if it gets stolen, so then on Shabbos, the guy's a Shomer Chinam. He's not a Shomer Sacher. So how do you resolve that? If the bailer really wants the item to be protected for all 7 weeks by a Shomer Sacher, there's something called Havla'a, that if you pay someone for work that they do for you all week, and you don't specify that they're getting paid specifically for Shabbos, that's permitted. See, I know some people, they're called rabbis, and they work 7 days a week. So the question is, how are these rabbis allowed to take salaries for the work that they're doing on Shabbos? The shul, if it was smart, would say, Rabbi, we're cutting your salary by 1/7 because we're not allowed to pay you for any of the work that you do on Shabbos. They should cut it actually by more than a seventh because the majority of the work, a disproportionate amount of the work is done on Shabbos. So why can't they say that? So the answer is that as if a person is getting a weekly or monthly or even annual, or even the Gemara says every 7 year salary, right? As long as it has not been specified that we are specifically paying you for the work that you do on Shabbos, there's no problem of paying someone a salary that is a conglomerate of both weekday and Shabbos work. That's clear.
Even though really, if you said that, well, I'm not going to work on Shabbos, no, you wouldn't be hired.
That's right. That's right. And so therefore it's implicit, right? It's implicit in the contract that the rabbi makes with the congregation that he's going to be working 7 days a week. He's on call 7 days a week. Every Wednesday is my day off. But is it a day off? Of course not, right? It's my day off on paper, but it's not my day off in practicality, which is okay because as long as I know that I have a certain amount of latitude, so I'll go out with my wife, let's say on Wednesday afternoons every once in a while, and we'll go shopping or whatever it is, or go to an appointment, whatever it is. But that's just, that's the nature of the work. So that's why it's not a halachic problem. So and therefore it's very simple. Just tell a guy that I want you to be a constant Shomer Sacher 7 days a week for the next 3 months, and I'll give you $60 a week for your efforts, of storing it and so forth. Or make it a monthly thing. I'll pay you $240 a month to guard over my stuff. And that way, there's no halachic problem at all. The guy is a Shomer Sacher even on Shabbos, and that's how you resolve the issue. So this is really only a practical shaila when it's specified, I'm paying you $10 a day, and the guy says, so you'll pay me $60 every week because I don't take work for Shabbos, right? Okay. So it's not really a very practical issue that's gonna come up that often. But the other scenario where a guy said, watch it for me for 3 months, and then he doesn't show up for another few weeks, there the shomer has a legitimate claim. What are you talking about? You weren't paying me for this overtime, and therefore I'm not liable. And any time an employer, this could have ramifications in labor law, where an employer takes advantage and doesn't pay overtime to the workers that stay late. They could argue, I don't have the status anymore of a shomer sachar or a socher for this period. Okay, next, borrowing objects. Mi sheshol mechavero o mishcheno chefetz mesuyam o behema o rechev. So a guy borrows from his neighbor a specific item, let's say an animal, or let's say a car. The arrangement is you're going to borrow it and you're going to use it and enjoy it, and then you're going to give it back to me the same way same way it was when you borrowed it. B'toch kedei hashimush b'behema meita machmat malacha o nishbar hakli b'shasha yamit'asek bo. So then we have this new category of what is a shoel. Shoel is chayiv for everything, even for ones, even for acts of God, like you said, Jovi. The only thing that a shoel, a borrower, is exempt from is mesa machmas malacha, where in the course of normal use, the item broke. So the classic case of the Gemara is I was plowing with the ox that you lent me, and the ox just had a heart attack and died. It was normal use. In other words, we do the forensics and we discover there was nothing out of the ordinary in the plowing, the way that I was plowing with this animal. Or the appliance breaks in the normal course of use. I borrow your snowblower, and all of a sudden it just fizzles, right? Frazzles and fizzles. Okay. So what's the shoal's liability? So the answer is hashol kli o behema v'chayotze bahen mishar metalton mechaverim avad o nignav afilu nenas onas gadol. He says when you borrow something from someone, which means you're getting a service, you're getting the benefit of using something for free, you are generally chayav for everything, both theft and loss, and even an ones. Let's say the animal breaks a bone, or the animal is kidnapped or forcibly, you're held up by robbers. Chayav l'shalim hakol shenamar. You have to pay for everything, as it says, v'chiyishal ish me'imre'ehu v'nishbar omes b'alav v'nimo shalim yishalim. That when you borrow something from a friend, if it breaks down or dies, as long as the owner is not present at the time, you have to pay. The lachein hashol chayv lishmor esakli al behema shemira meula kevin shu chayv afilu ba'onsen umischayv l'shalim. That's why the shoel has the highest level of liability and has to make sure that he's watching it very carefully. Because all the benefit is his. And furthermore, if it's an animal that he borrows, let's say an ox to plow his field, he's got to make sure that he's properly feeding the animal, and he has to pay for that food. But if in the course of working the animal dies, as long as you used it in its normal fashion, you're going to be exempt. Now, what's an example of an abnormal use? Let's say I put too much weight on the animal. Let's say I don't feed it its proper normal diet. I give it even more expensive food than what it usually eats, but It's not used to eating that food. So that could be a contributory cause to the animal's death, and therefore I'm going to be liable. Or the Gemara talks about, let's say the animal is normally used to working in the valley, and I schlep it up to the hilltop to work. Well, the air is thinner at a higher elevation. So therefore, I'm going to be putter for that as well. I'm going to be chayv rather for that as well, because I changed the animal's normal work situation. Okay. Next, when I borrow something and then I return it to a family member, we've seen this before as well. Misha shol eza chayfetz mesuyam me'aba alim ve'acharei hashimush bo lahachziro. Guy borrows an item and wants to return it. Hayim yachol lahachziro leishto o le'echad mibnei beso. Can he return it to one of the family members? Which is a very common thing. I borrow the snowblower. I want to give it back, but it's in the middle of the day. The guy's already gone to work. Can I give it to his wife? Can I ring the doorbell or his one of his children? I say, your dad lent me a snowblower. I'd like to put it back in the garage. Do you mind opening the garage door and I'll put it in there? Okay. So the answer is Misha Shal Ezed Arva Misuim Haba'olim Chayv Lachzer Dafka Lamashil Velo Liishto. So the answer is no, you have not fulfilled your responsibility by giving it back to a family member. You cannot give it back to his wife and say, now I'm no more the shoel. The chol shekain lo livnei beis, nor can you give it to any other family member. Ele im kain im hamashil omer b'meforash lachzer liishto. Unless you get express permission from the owner of the item, you can give it to my wife. Or if the wife assumes financial responsibility for the household. There are many times when the wife actually is more in charge of the house's finances than the husband is. In that situation, you can certainly, let's say the wife is the one who allocated funds to buy the snowblower in the first place. So then in that kind of situation, you could return it to her because she's assumed to be the responsible party. So it all depends on the dynamics of the family relationships. But what the halach is basically saying is you cannot take it for granted just because someone lives in the guy's house that you can return it to that household member just because they're living there and they're related. Because a lot of times the kid, that you want to return it to, well, he may be estranged from his parents or he may be very irresponsible. So just by saying, here, I'm going to leave this with you, is that okay? And the kid is like half stoned or whatever. And he says, yeah, man, sure. And, and so you don't know. So that's why the halacha holds you liable, because the guy then finds out that the house was ransacked when his son went out to party with his friends and left the door unlocked. And then the item that you had returned was stolen as well. So he could hold you liable. He says, who gave you permission to return it to my son, my irresponsible son? So that's why you have to make sure that you have to get express permission from the owner to return it to a family member. Okay. Okay, so that's just common sense. All right, let us go on. A person who rents a renter who delays returning the item. A guy rents a car and all of a sudden something happens and he's not able to return it by the allocated date. Well, the rental agency says, no problem. We'll just continue charging you for every additional day that you're out. So the question is, what does halacha have to say if a person is renting an item and is unable to return it by the allocated date? So, Misha Sochar Metaltalov Kidei Lakachtam Lamakom Mesuyam. Okish Sochar Rechev Kidei Linso Lamakom Mesuyam. So a person rents or leases certain appliances or items in order to transport them, or he rents a car to be able to go to a specific place. Va'oso adam nisakev sham machmas eza ones, and he gets stuck there. Okay, I got to open up the next packet. So we're up to number 13. We're actually almost done with the Sefer, if my memory serves me correctly. So let's just get this. Just give it a sec. Here we go. Let's see, how many more do we have? It goes up to 17 or 18. So we're up to 13 now. So, and for whatever mishap, he's not able to get back in time to the rental agency, because of whatever mishap that occurred. Well, mishum kach, like a lot of times, I just rented a car in Israel, and I thought I'd have plenty of time to get it back by the 4 p.m., deadline. But it turned out there was a ton of traffic in Yerushalayim, and it took, much longer than I had anticipated to just drive those few meters to get to King David Street to drop it off. So it was a good thing we made it, but we just made it by the skin of our teeth. It was like I thought I'd have easy couple of hours, be early. No, not so. Okay, and to get into Yerushalayim back, there was a whole backup on the one. Okay, which is why I'm debating whether I'm even going to have a car in Israel. Because what? The train is much better, So, but look, there may be situations where you need a car, but you can do these daily rentals. They have these cars that you can rent for a day that are all over. Apparently, they're all over the different locations. I have to just find out the system.
The light rail's coming too.
And the light rail's coming too. Yeah. Anyway, and that's why you couldn't return the item on time. Can the renter claim, it was a total accident, totally unanticipated, and therefore I shouldn't be liable to pay the overtime that I couldn't return the item. Like I wasn't aware that there was going to be this 3-car accident on Highway 1, which was going to keep me on the road an extra hour, or extra 2 hours, whatever it is. So therefore, I don't want to have to pay because it's not my fault. I gave myself plenty of time. Is that ever a valid claim? Well, I think with auto rental agencies, it's certainly not a valid claim, right? Does it ever work?
It's your problem.
Yeah, right. So the answer is Misha Sachar is a davar mesuyim kedei liyishtamish bo beisa makom, o shesachar rechav v'nisakiv shamach maseiza oines, im sachar es hachefetz o rechav l'zman katzu v'lo higia b'zman shekavu, tzarich l'shalim schar avor al kol yom v'yom she me'ever l'zman. Yeah, so he says, yeah, sorry. Even if it was a total onus, you still have to pay for the overtime. If you didn't come back on the time that you designated for the amount that you were paying, you have to pay for each additional day. But let's say you rented an item. Doesn't have to be a car. Let's say it could be some kind of appliance or garment, and you need it because you're going to a certain place, and you know that in order that the time that it takes to get there and to get back takes X number of days. And because of some mishap that occurred on the road, totally unforeseen, totally not your fault, you came back late. Kagon shahanar Allah al gidosav v'harashuyos chasmu es hakvish milaver bo. He says, let's say the river overflowed. And as a result of the river overflowing, the guy was not able to travel on the road to get back on time, and he got stuck. Okay, they closed the border or whatever it is. So he says, V'imhaya ones haragil. So he says, in that case, I have said libalim. He says, in that case, then the loss has to go to the owner of the appliance. Which, in other words, if it's really an act of God, let's say, there's a flash flood, a tsunami, an earthquake, where I literally couldn't get, I was physically unable to get, even if I would have been able to get a special lane to get to you, there was simply no way for me to physically access with the place where you currently are because of some regional, I think even with the auto company, they might take that into consideration, right?
There's a snowstorm. Acts of God are generally, you're good. Yes.
Yeah. So then the owner of the appliance has to assume that he has to swallow that. Okay, so we'll continue this Amir Hashem tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.